Hi everyone, Sam Eckmann for Gold Derby, joined here today by Adrian Peng Correia, cinematographer for Nobody Wants This, which is a brand new comedy. And I'm just curious, when you're starting out on a brand new show, uh, it's an original idea. So what elements are you kind of latching onto when you're trying to establish the look and feel for a new series?
Well, it's really interesting because the nature of romantic comedies kind of have all the trappings and kind of holds of what the genre is. So you kind of have to entertain the idea of what is traditionally thought of as romantic, what is traditionally thought of as comedic, and that was a funny thing because in the beginning we were trying to find this balance between what would be appropriate and responsible to the idea of what a romantic comedy was, but could we kind of give ourselves some options to be able to make it into something a little bit more textured, a little bit more lively, maybe something that had a little bit more um, panache to it. Maybe not necessarily in terms of the way that the camera is used, but something in the way that maybe where we're a little bit more adventurous with lighting, maybe a little bit more adventurous with contrast and color, and that's basically what we set out to do. And it was Greg Matola in the beginning of our conversations where we started to entertain the idea of using anamorphic to try and just elevate it a little bit in terms of because there wasn't going to be a chance for us to do wild kind of camera moves. It's like the nature of the edit is so important for timing and for creating the sense of balance between characters and the timing in the context of the episode. So anamorphic is one of the easiest things for us to kind of latch on to kind of give a sense of scope to the show and really kind of amp the romantic element of it. And I knew there would be some things just based on the nature of what our production was, where anamorphic would be able to give us just this really kind of great type of stylings and backgrounds, especially around Los Angeles. So we embraced that, and then it really paid dividends, particularly in the first episode with the nighttime dinner sequence with all the kind of highlights and the backgrounds of the Hollywood Hills. So at that point, me and Greg were very very happy. Yeah.
Yeah, that dinner sequence makes me think of you use a lot of close-ups on your actors quite a bit, which is really great because you have really expressive people on this series. What made you kind of gravitate towards that? Because like for that dinner scene, it really comes alive because of them.
Well, we just it's like set precariously on a hillside, and we had so many pages to shoot that day. We had so many things to do. So the mandate, and this is from a production wide, this is not just that particular scene, but from the production as a whole, was like, like we're not using dollies, no lights bigger than what you can plug into a wall, So in terms of like being lean and mean, it was, I mean, that whole dinner scene is lit with one 8 foot tube and one 4 foot uh, LED box. That's the lighting for the entire scene. And then basically it's like positioning them in the right place, maybe having some flame units or some practical lighting bulbs that Claire Bennett, our production designer, gave us, and then basically whatever the existing practicals in the house were on the opposite side from the hill. So, but it's really just two lights, and it's of our it's and it was about being economical. And I come from G&E. I was a terrible camera assistant, so I kind of left immediately to kind of learn lighting. So I know what I can achieve with as little as I need to. And also it allowed us to shoot the Sony Venice, which is a camera, the Venice 2, excuse me, which is a camera that has a really, really clean aesthetic. We could shoot it at really, really high ISOs. The entirety of that show is shot at almost entirely at 4,000 ISO, which is, a couple times higher than even what is the normal rated speed for that camera. And I just think texturally, with some magic that we do in post and the use of the lenses and the quality of our lighting, was going to give us this aesthetic that kind of felt very cinematic and felt filmic. And when you have beautiful people for close-ups, anamorphic really does shine if you could put it into the right backgrounds. And and that's the kind of thing that really kind of sells those moments of connection, at least for Aaron and for Craig DeGreggio, the showrunner. We're making sure that in close-ups they looked amazing. So it's one of those things when you have somebody like Adam and of course Kristen, you need to be able to light them appropriately for close-ups because that's where they were going to really have that connective tissue and that charisma and that magic was in those moments. So
Yeah. And in addition to, the lighting and the very clean feel to it, there's something about the cinematography to me that when I'm watching it as the viewer, it felt like I'm inside the scene as a character almost rather than just observing it. Does that feel accurate to you with your approach? Where does that effect come from?
Well, I think it comes from smart blocking with the actors and directors that know that like what are the strengths of the series. And like the camera's never really far away from any of them. Even on a longer lens and anamorphic in that format at 8.6K, they're still relatively wide lenses. So, the cameras are almost always really close to the action for the most part. Even in a three shot or a wide shot around a table, the lens is still close to the people. So, and that was important in terms of when it was established with Greg, was making sure that the lenses felt like they were with characters. And as a result, it doesn't feel like it has this kind of stateliness that sometimes comes with like the studio feel of a romantic comedy traditionally. It has a bit more of a it's not gritty, but it has a bit more of a kind of this lived in texture of what a handheld camera that's actively close to people would make it feel like it's a more lived in environment. But then you're dealing with an amped up color space, an amped up camera LUT and lighting and use of color, and that gives it the sense of being uh, stylized and cinematic, and the camera helps it feel grounded. So if you use those things together, it kind of creates this universe that makes it feel real, but still elevated like a comedy kind of needs to be.
Yeah, you mentioned kind of the approach, what goes into a romantic comedy, but you have a lot of different types of series, very different genres under your belt. Everything from Glow to Rami. You have the latest Walking Dead spinoff. Do you feel like even within that breadth of different genres, you have a kind of aesthetic or a style that defines your work, or does it change from project to project?
Well, when I started, I was really conscious of the fact, and this was like maybe this was an old-fashioned fear from cinematographers. So I used to, when I was coming up with, was this idea of being pigeonholed, this idea of being labeled. And that was a great fear because I had no contacts in the industry. So I thought if I could be as labyrinthian way in terms of my artistic expression and not being nailed down to one thing, that would give me the greatest breadth, the greatest chance to tell as many stories as I could, because I didn't really have the resources in terms of people or money or anything. So to be able, the ability to be more of a chameleon in terms of the way I light and the way I choose to frame and the way I use camera, those are the things that are going to allow me to have a scope in a career. And it just ends up having to be that I could do stories like Rami or stories like The Flight Attendant or things like Florida Man and still be able to kind of tell all different kinds of stories and still feel like I'm true to myself as a cinematographer, but I don't get pigeonholed into exactly how he exactly shoots a comedy or how he shoots a drama or even horror films or whatever. So it's important to me just that to be hardwired to the page and to let my motivations come from that. But my taste is the thing that allows me to be able to make the choices. And luckily, I've been able to tell them in all kinds of different kinds of stories, different kinds of people. So
And so when you're diving in between those different genres, is there ever a desire to sort of like go against the grain, make the unexpected choice? When does that come into play?
I mean, that's kind of the thing for a lot of people, right? It's just this idea of like, I'm doing a romantic comedy. I don't want to do a traditional romantic comedy. I mean, that's kind of the thing all cinematographers kind of fight against. This is the idea of trying to be something new. I don't necessarily feel the need that I have to reinvent the wheel. What I feel like I have to do is based on the discussions with everybody above the line and the script writers and the creators and the showrunners is finding a pathway forward based on our prep and our ideas and our tastes and our palettes that we've discovered in the show, and then finding this idea, whatever is the truest point of that expression. Now, sometimes that's kind of like emboldened and kind of embraced by the nature of the genre we're shooting in. Sometimes we find ways to buck back against it. But I think if it's always coming from a point of truth and empathy and character, then it's always going to feel right one way or the other. But there are certain things for me as a cinematographer that I just buck against in terms of trends, whether it means how you light a face or the nature of exposure, how dark is too dark. Like a lot of my references come back from the idea of film noir lighting and black and white lighting, and the idea that if it could look good in black and white, that it should look good in color. And those old aesthetics, like having the brightest point of exposure being the deepest part in the frame for depth. A lot of those things I still try to embrace, and they kind of color who I am and how I shoot.
Well, the truth, empathy, and character is certainly on display in this series. So, Adrian, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you. Thanks for the time.